Good evening, everybody. How's everyone doing tonight? We're going to do another episode of I Have Such Sights to Show You. It's my special Hellraiser series, which, granted, I haven't done an episode in quite a few months, but here we are. And I thought for tonight I would talk about basically the signature final girl of the series, Kirsty Cotton. Of course, each horror series has its signature final girl. You know, with Halloween, you have Laurie Strode. With Nightmare on Elm Street, you have Nancy Thompson. With Scream, you have Sidney Prescott. And of course, with Hellraiser, it's always been Kirsty. I would venture to say probably second only to Pinhead as probably being the most popular and probably most important character in the series. Obviously, with Pinhead, he's basically the common thread throughout all those movies. But Kirsty being basically the main final girl of the first two movies, certainly has set the pace and kind of set the standard for that series. And I think for most of us, our Hellraiser fans, obviously she's probably our favorite. And I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into the character and who this character was and why she's so popular. And also wanted to talk about maybe how, and Grant's always subjective, how she might even be the best final girl there's ever been. So I'm just going to mainly focus on her character as it pertains to the first two Hellraiser movies because, yes, she's in Hellraiser 3, but it's a very brief role. It's kind of like almost, well, not a flashback scene, but she's shown in like a video. And then, of course, she appears in the sixth installment, Hellseeker, but really doesn't play a big part in that movie until about the last 15 minutes. So we're just going to focus on the first two films. So, anyhow, here's the way I like to start off talking about this character. Your uncle is in your father's skin, and he wants to kill you and have sex with you, probably in that order. That was the statement or question that Clive Barker posed to young Ashley Lawrence at the time when she auditioned for the role of Kirsty Cotton. Hellraiser, of course, was adapted from Barker's novella, The Hellbound Heart. Whatever Ashley's reaction was, Clive Barker knew that he had found his Kirsty at that moment. She's certainly, obviously, people who know me know that Hellraiser is my favorite horror movie of all time. So it would kind of stand to reason that, yes, Kirsty would be my favorite final girl in this wonderful genre of horror, which we all love. For many years, I think the character Kirsty kind of flew under the radar when the topic of best final girls would come up. Now, perhaps due to the fact, and a lot of that was probably due to the fact that Hellraiser never quite achieved the same mainstream notoriety of other movies, like basically the big three, like Halloween, Friday the 13th, or Nightmare on Elm Street, or even the Scream franchise. Which I think for us Hellraiser fans, I think we're kind of fine with. We sometimes like to prefer to hide under the floorboards of horror or lurking in the shadows or being confined in the darkness of another dimension, patiently waiting for some poor, curious, unassuming soul to solve a lament configuration, bringing us from dark to the light. But it would seem that in recent years, and I see this a lot on many social media outlets, that whether it's due to maybe younger fans who have recently discovered Hellraiser or the older fans revisiting Barker's masterpiece, or perhaps the popularity of Ashley Lawrence on the horror convention circuit, the horror fandom, I think, are looking at Kirsty as one really kick-ass final girl, and certainly worthy of being discussed as one of the best. I think Kirsty displays all the typical attributes that you would want from a final girl. She has that girl next door look to her, pretty but not necessarily overly sexualized. She is likable and relatable. Kirsty is someone you would want to be friends with. She's basically smart, loyal, can take care of herself, and she's dependable. By the second movie, she is not only trying to save herself, but her father, and also becomes of a protector of sorts to Tiffany. She is also very fierce and courageous, willing to fight to the enemy, kind of like almost a type of probably a I guess a personality trait that she would share with someone like, say, Ripley from the Alien series, for example. Sure, this final girl, particularly in the first movie, makes a few little mistakes, like opening the puzzle box for the first time, but all final girls have their share of mistakes. We all make our mistakes. It's all about learning and growing from those mistakes. Some will say that she doesn't have quite as much of an arc in the first film, which is fair, but most final girls really don't complete their arc until the next sequel that they appear in. Because I think it is in Hellraiser 2 that Kirsty completes her character arc. There are a few attributes that might differentiate herself from others, and I'll discuss those later. Anyhow, if we go back to the first film, in Hellraiser, Kirsty is trying to establish herself by getting her own apartment and finding a job at a local pet store, while also trying to be a supportive daughter to her father, Larry. She doesn't get along well with Larry's wife, Julia, but tries to make the best of it. She goes against the grain because when it comes to the trope of the final girl being pure and a virgin, that kind of goes out the wayside, which I kind of like because it kind of pushes back on that. She meets a guy named Steve at her father's dinner party and takes him home to her place. That trope, anyway, all often annoyed me, as I think for the most part, one's sexuality, particularly a woman's sexuality, and I'm sure a lot of my female fans out there would agree, shouldn't have anything to do with how virtuous you are. I mean, this was 1987, not after all, and not 1957. But at the time, this was Reagan's America or Thatcher's England, so maybe that has something to do with that trope. But I digress. At her father's request, while they're having lunch, she drops by the old Cotton family home in an attempt to try and make friends with Julia, only to discover that Julia's been bringing home another man. Kirsty investigates further, suspecting Julia is having an affair, but it is much worse than that. Her Uncle Frank is feeding off this unassuming man who has no skin, that being Frank, not having any skin. In, of course, the opening scene of the movie, Frank acquires the mysterious puzzle box, solves it, leading him to the pleasures and pain of hell. But he is resurrected, and Julia becomes his accomplice, and as they have had a prior affair themselves. When Kirsty stumbles on the deplorable event of Frank feeding on this unassuming man, Frank comes after her with his signature quote, "Come to daddy." We see that Kirsty is a fighter in this scene and resourceful as she gives a knee to Frank's groin. Apparently, at this point, Frank's testicles must have regenerated by this point. And she grabs the box, throws it through the window, running out of the house. She then grabs the box and keeps running before fainting. Then moments later, she awakens in a hospital and is locked into her room. A doctor who, by the way, has the bedside manners of Attila the Hun, I would say, presents her the puzzle box and leaves it with her. Kirsty's curiosity nearly gets the better of her as she solves the box, bringing forth the Cenobites. Now, in her defense, she really didn't know what the box was or what it did. But confronted by the Hell Priest or Pinhead, or the lead Cenobite, whichever you prefer, along with the other Cenobites of the female Cenobite, Chatterer, and Butterball, they threaten to tear her soul apart. Kirsty shows her intelligence and her ability to think on her feet by making a bargain with the demons. Spare her, and she'll lead them to Frank, who escaped them. Kirsty then runs back to her dreary family home to warn her father, obviously. But unbeknownst to her, he has already been murdered by Julie and Frank. Frank, who is also wearing Larry's skin on top of that. She doesn't notice this at first, as she is still highly distressed. But when Frank mutters those cryptic words once again, "Come to daddy," she is horrified, but shows her resilience with some luck and perseverance. This is what might set Kirsty apart from the other final girls. Most of these other heroines typically have only one adversary they have to deal with. Not only does she have to deal with Pinhead and the Cenobites, who eventually destroy Frank, but then come after her, but she also has to deal with the real villains of the story, Frank and Julia. She manages to defeat them by outsmarting Frank, dispatching the Cenobites back to hell by using the box, with little to no help at all from anyone. Sure, Steve shows up at the end, but is of little use to her. At one point, Kirsty, while fighting with the remaining Cenobite known as the Engineer, she actually pushes Steve out of the way, and it's almost like she is thinking, "I got this. I don't need you around right now." As a side note, the character of Steve was meant to have more of a role in the film, but as the making of the film progressed, Barker could see that Kirsty really didn't need any help and could end up cutting most of the scenes out of actor who played Steve out of the movie. I think a lot of this was due to Ashley's performance and Barker having the ability to recognize it. So now we move on to Hellraiser 2. Just a few hours after the events of Hellraiser, Kirsty wakes up in yet another hospital. This time it's a mental hospital called the Channard Institute, run by Dr. Channard. Now, not only does Kirsty have to fight for her life and soul, but now her sanity, as no one believes her story. She sees images of a skinned corpse with a cryptic message, "I'm in hell, help me." She assumes it's her father. Her journey will eventually lead our determined final girl to hell to rescue her father. But Julia's back, resurrected much like Frank was from the previous film, with the help of Channard, who is obsessed with the lore of the Lamet configuration and the Leviathan, a lord of hell and the god of flesh and desire. At least Kirsty gets some useful assistance this time. First, there is Kyle, a young doctor who works at the Institute and soon believes her story as he witnesses Julia's resurrection and views a whole collection of puzzle boxes that belong to Channard. Unfortunately, he makes a grave lapse in judgment and falls prey to Julia. But then there is Tiffany, a young mute teenager who is a patient at the Institute and has a remarkable puzzle-solving skills. Channard uses Tiffany's skills to open the box in a doorway to Leviathan's Labyrinth, a section of hell, we would presume. Kirsty enters the corridor to hell, hoping to find her father, but instead finds Frank, who actually was the one who sent the message in the first place. Once again, Kirsty stands her ground in an act of defiance. This is where Kirsty's strength really shows, and I'm going to talk more about this particular pivotal scene, about Kirsty versus Frank, a theme in both movies at the end of this post that I kind of caught on to, and I've talked about this theme before, I think, but anyhow, she once again encounters Pinhead and the Cenobites, who decide to let her roam around hell. As Pinhead states, "We have eternity to know your flesh." Even though she fails to find her father, she does find Tiffany and becomes a protector. She couldn't save Larry, but maybe she can still save herself and Tiffany while thwarting Julia, who loses her skin in a wind tunnel of sorts. At this point, Kirsty has been running on adrenaline. No time to rest, no time to regroup or plan, just reacting to what's in front of her. She does, she does, however, take a brief moment to reflect on her failure to save her father. It is possible the first time she's this is probably possible that it's the first time she's even had a chance to mourn his loss. Tiffany comforts her during this time, and the two women kind of become an evil fighting duo for the most part. Tiffany is the Robin to Kirsty's Batman. Where Frank and Julia have been defeated, Channard has become a supercharged Cenobite. Kirsty is once again able to bargain with Pinhead by reminding him and the other Cenobites of their own lost humanity when the Channard Cenobite makes his entrance and ends up destroying Pinhead and the rest of the crew. This was probably my main critique of that story. I thought that scene was a little bit rushed and the fight should have lasted a little bit longer. But I think I talked more about that in detail when I did my analysis of Hellraiser 2. In a desperate move to save Tiffany from Channard, Kirsty actually puts on Julia's skin to distract Channard, just long enough for Tiffany to finish solving the puzzle, killing Channard while the two women escape. Now that's what I call teamwork. Though throughout these two movies, Kirsty was covered in dirt, blood, maggots, and anything else you can think of, but never lost her edge. Now let's circle back to Kirsty and Frank. I kind of have a theory about Kirsty and one of her main adversaries, Frank. Now, this has never been confirmed by anyone involved in these movies, but myself and a few others in the Hellraiser fans have theorized that given Frank's sick and incestuous obsession with Kirsty established in the first film, it kind of leads me to believe that perhaps when Kirsty was younger, Frank may have attempted to get, shall we say, inappropriate with her, but probably failed, hence his obsession, the one that got away. I think we can assume that there are no limits to what Frank will or will not do. After all, it's why Frank seeks out the box in the first place. More than likely, this was probably a memory that Kirsty suppressed, as many people do who suffer such a thing. It is the word spoken by Frank, "Come to Daddy," that I think triggers that memory for Kirsty. So if this is true, my theory is correct, then that scene in the second film between her and Frank becomes that much more powerful. In the first movie, she's terrified of Frank, not because how he looked necessarily, but what he did to her father and what he tried to do to her in the past and certainly in the present. But by the second movie, Kirsty is no longer afraid, but only disgusted by Frank and loathes him and is able to manipulate Frank by pretending to give in to him. But with a look of disdain on her face, she looks at Frank and says, "I'd rather burn." This brings her character almost full circle and is the classic tale of the victim taking power away from her attacker. And I think that's what really even strengthens Kirsty even more. So that's kind of my breakdown of Kirsty in this series, at least with the first two films. I'd like to know from all of you what you guys think of Kirsty Cotton as a final girl. I'll say she's certainly been my favorite since I first watched the first Hellraiser back when I was like 14 years old or so. But this character I always liked, definitely my favorite final girl. I think Ashley Lawrence, of course, one of my favorite actresses in horror. And so, yeah, I thought, hope everyone enjoyed this short little video here, and feel free to comment below what your thoughts are on Kirsty, and also give a like and subscribe, and feel free to share this video. I will probably be doing another one of these videos next month. I might have a special guest on. I'm not going to say who, so not to spoil it or anything, or jinx it, either way. And of course, as I've mentioned on my last video, we'll be having another episode of Horror Hangouts on Saturday night, March 7th. We'll be discussing, since we have another Friday the 13th on our way, plus March is Women of Horror Month. Thought it'd be a great idea to discuss our favorite female characters in the Friday the 13th franchise. So until then, I hope everyone has a great evening and a great week, and we'll talk to you later. Good evening, everyone.